My name is Ethan. I'm 22 years old, living in a quiet suburban town just outside the city. Normally, I don't talk much about myself, but I feel like sharing this story might help me make sense of it all. I grew up in what most people would call a pretty typical family. My dad, Robert, is a project manager, constantly juggling deadlines and working long hours. My mum, well, she's not my biological mom. She's my stepmom, Emma. She became part of my life when I was around 10 years old. Honestly, I wasn't exactly thrilled about her arrival at first. Like most kids, I was a bit stubborn and resistant to change. But Emma wasn't like the typical stepmom you might imagine. She had this warmth about her, an ability to make everyone feel welcome and at ease, like they belonged. I didn't fully appreciate it back then, but over time I came to see her as an anchor in my life, a steady presence I could always rely on. Fast forward to today and I'm 22. I've been out of high school for a few years and currently work at a tech company not far from home. I'm in that weird in-between phase, trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. The days tend to blur together, but I genuinely enjoy working in tech. Problem-solving and creating give me a sense of purpose. Dad's still consumed by his demanding schedule, always caught up in his projects. Emma, however, is home more often. We live in a big old house now, and most days I find myself either working remotely in the living room or just lounging on the couch. It was on one of those ordinary days that everything changed. It started off like any other. Dad had left early for work, leaving Emma and me alone at home. She was in the kitchen making lunch while I relaxed on the couch, scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet except for the occasional sound of birds chirping outside and Emma's soft movements in the kitchen. I had just ended a phone call with a friend about a project we were collaborating on. It wasn't anything important, just the usual conversation. After hanging up, I stretched out on the couch, closing my eyes for a moment. I didn't even hear Emma come into the room until she was standing in front of me, blocking the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Hey, Ethan," she said, her voice calm and soothing as always. She had this way of saying my name that instantly made things feel better. "How's your day going?" I opened my eyes and smiled faintly. Emma was dressed casually, as usual. Jeans and a simple t-shirt, her long brown hair cascading loosely over her shoulders. There was an effortless elegance about her, something natural and understated. But that day, something felt different. Her usual warm smile was there, but her eyes seemed distant, more pensive than usual. "It's going okay," I replied, sitting up slightly and shifting my position. "Just a normal day, you know." She nodded and took a step closer. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" She hesitated as though searching for the right words. "I've noticed you've seemed a little distant lately. You're not quite yourself," I shrugged, feeling slightly uneasy. "I guess I've just been busy with work. There's been a lot on my mind." Emma smiled softly and sat down beside me on the couch. Her closeness made me a little nervous, though I couldn't explain why. We'd sat together countless times before, chatting casually, but this time felt different. There was an unfamiliar energy in the air, something almost electric. I couldn't ignore the way her presence seemed to fill the space in a way it hadn't before. "You know you can talk to me, right, Ethan?" she said gently, her gaze steady. "About anything." I nodded, my throat tightening. For a split second, I wanted to tell her everything, the pressure I was under, the uncertainty about my future, the dreams I was too afraid to pursue. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. Instead, I just stared at the floor, lost in my thoughts. Emma reached out and placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was warm, sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced up, meeting her eyes. There was an intensity in her gaze, something caring but also different, something that made my heart race. "Ethan," she said softly, her hand lingering on my arm. "I've always been here for you, and I always will be." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me didn't want her to stop, but another part of me was warning me that we were crossing a line. Still, I couldn't pull away. Instead, I sat frozen as she leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear. "I just want you to know how much you mean to me," she whispered. My chest tightened as her words hung in the air. My heart was pounding and everything around us seemed to fade away. Her lips brushed against mine before I even realized what was happening. The kiss was soft, hesitant, but it carried so much emotion that I couldn't help but respond. My hands moved instinctively to her waist as the rooms seemed to spin. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, and the tension between us dissolved into something undeniable. I pulled back slightly, breathless and overwhelmed. My mind was racing with confusion, but the way she looked at me with such care and tenderness made everything feel strangely okay. Her hands slowly moved to my belt, and she began unfastening it. She eased my pants down, and before I knew it, she was performing oral sex on me. The sensation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, soothing, intimate, and strangely comforting. She seemed so skilled, and I was completely caught up in the moment. I couldn't find the words to process what was happening. My hands rested on her waist, lingering there as if unsure whether to stay or pull away. She didn't retreat, and the uncertainty in her expression mirrored my own. But her presence was steady, like she was waiting for me to decide what would come next. "Emma," I managed to say, my voice unsteady, unsure of how to navigate the situation. I had no idea what was appropriate anymore. She gave me a faint smile, her finger lightly tracing over my hand where it rested on her waist. "I know, Ethan," she said softly. "I know this is unexpected, but sometimes things happen that we can't fully understand right away. It's okay to feel uncertain, and it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling." Her voice was steady, comforting, and I exhaled deeply, trying to steady the storm inside me. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to confront something I'd never fully acknowledged before. It wasn't just a fleeting moment. The way she made me feel cared for and valued, like I was the only one who mattered. It was something deeper, something I had buried under layers of denial for so long. Gently, she cupped my face with her hands, her touch soft and almost reverent. "I've always been here for you, Ethan," she murmured. "Not just as your stepmom, but as someone who deeply cares about you. I'm here right now if you want me to be." Her words settled in my chest like a weight, but it wasn't a burden. Instead, it felt strangely liberating. The confusion, guilt, and fear all swirled together, but beneath it all was an undeniable pull. Whatever was between us felt real, impossible to ignore. The question was whether we could give in to it or whether we should walk away, pretending it had never happened. I met her gaze again, feeling the intensity of the moment. It was as though the world had faded, leaving only the two of us and the warmth of her skin. Her shallow breaths mirrored mine, and I slowly leaned in, drawn to her like a magnet. This time, there was no hesitation. Our lips met again, and the kiss carried a quiet urgency. It wasn't just a kiss. It was an answer to the unspoken questions hanging between us. My hands slid up her back, pulling her closer as I felt the heat of her body against mine. Emma's hands moved to my chest, her fingers gripping the fabric of my shirt tightly, as if she couldn't let go. The kiss deepened and time seemed to stop. There was no past, no future, just this moment and the connection between us. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing heavily, our chests rising and falling in sync. I couldn't look away from her. Her eyes, darker now, held a mixture of desire and uncertainty. But she didn't pull back and she didn't run. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wanting you." Her fingers traced down my arm, her touch grounding me. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "We don't have to figure it all out right now. Sometimes things don't need to make sense. They just need to happen. We'll figure it out together." There was a promise in her words, one that was both comforting and terrifying, but in that moment I didn't want to analyze or think. I just wanted her. Her lips brushed against my ear as she whispered, "Let's not think about the consequences right now. Let's just be in this moment." Her words broke through any resistance I had left, and I nodded almost instinctively. It felt like we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't control, and for once I didn't want to hold back. I leaned in and kissed her again, this time with more urgency, more desperation. Her hands moved to the hem of my shirt, lifting it, and I helped her pull it over my head. The cool air brushed against my skin, quickly replaced by the warmth of her hands. Every touch, every kiss ignited something inside me that I couldn't suppress anymore. Her fingers slid down my body, brushing against my jeans, before hooking into the waistband and slowly pulling them down. I mirrored her movements, helping her remove her shirt, revealing the smoothness of her skin. When we were both undressed, I paused, taking a moment to really see her. Her eyes held a mixture of desire and vulnerability, a willingness to give herself to something unknown. In that moment, I realized I didn't want to rush this. I wanted to savor every second, every touch. I leaned in, kissing her again, this time slower, deeper, as we pulled each other closer. Her heartbeat echoed against my chest, and I knew that whatever happened next, I would never be the same. The intensity of the moment was overwhelming, and for a few fleeting seconds, it felt as though nothing could interrupt the connection we were exploring. My hands moved along her back, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat matching my own. The warmth of her skin against mine felt so right, as though everything in my life had led me to this. But then the sound of the front door creaking open shattered the haze of desire. My heart skipped a beat and I froze, instinctively pulling away from Emma as the world outside came rushing back. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by the sound of a door opening. My dad's voice, muffled but unmistakable, drifted into the living room. "Emma, I'm home!" Robert called out, his tone casual as if nothing was amiss. Emma's breath caught, and her eyes widened with panic. She scrambled for the nearest shirt, yanking it over her head as she sat upright, trying to hide any evidence of what had just transpired. My heart was pounding, the blood rushing in my ears as I struggled to process how quickly everything had changed. The quiet intimacy of the moment had been replaced by a stark and sudden realization. My dad was home, completely unaware of what had almost happened. "Ethan!" Robert's voice called out again, louder this time as his footsteps neared the living room. "Where are you?" I scrambled to my feet, hastily pulling my shirt back on and trying to steady myself, though my thoughts were racing. How was I supposed to act? What should I even say? Just a second," I shouted back, my voice betraying my nerves. Emma shot me a panicked look before turning her attention toward the hallway, her face flushed with embarrassment. She cleared her throat, visibly trying to regain her composure, though the emotions on her face were hard to miss. A blend of confusion, longing, and fear. Despite her effort to appear calm, the shift between us was undeniable. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of what had nearly happened. Moments later, Robert appeared in the doorway, his expression easygoing and unaware of the tension lingering in the room. "You two just hanging out?" he asked casually. "I thought we could have lunch together. I brought some sandwiches." Emma immediately straightened, smoothing her clothes and forcing a smile onto her face. "Oh, sure, that sounds great," she replied, her voice slightly too high-pitched, betraying her unease. I nodded quickly, attempting to seem normal, but my mind was still spinning. Everything between us had changed, yet here we were, pretending as if nothing had happened. I wasn't sure how to look at Emma anymore, how to reconcile what we had just shared with the reality of the situation. The warmth I had felt moments earlier seemed so far away now, replaced by an awkward silence. "Good," Robert said cheerfully, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. "I'll just grab a drink." As he headed into the kitchen, the tension between Emma and me lingered like an invisible thread, something connecting us but also keeping us apart. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Was it regret? Longing? I couldn't be sure. I wanted to say something to break the silence, but no words came. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? There was no way to make sense of it, no way to package it into something that could be understood. "So, how's that project of yours coming along?" Robert called from the kitchen, his tone light as he tried to make small talk, completely oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. Forcing myself to respond, I answered, "It's going well. Just a lot to handle right now." My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Emma gave a weak smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her mind clearly as unsettled as mine. The sound of Robert rummaging in the kitchen filled the room, but I couldn't help glancing at Emma. The moment we had shared earlier seemed to call to me, pulling me back in with a strength I wasn't ready to face. In the quiet pauses between words, we both knew the truth. Whatever had passed between us wasn't something we could easily forget. For now, though, we had no choice but to act as if nothing had changed, to pretend everything was normal. The rest of the afternoon went by in a haze. The three of us sat in the kitchen, eating lunch and making polite conversation as though nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, the air between Emma and me was thick with unspoken words, with the memory of what had almost happened. Deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close.